Now let's take a talk of the situation in West Asia, where death toll in Israel due to Iranian missile attacks has now risen to 10. According to Israeli emergency services, waves of overnight Iranian strikes have killed at least 10 people, including children. Over 200 people have been reportedly wounded in the Iranian strikes, and in central Israel, at least 4 people, including a 10-year-old boy, were killed and around 100 others were wounded in an Iranian rocket strike. In the Arab city of Tamra, east of Haifa, 4 women have been killed. In Shfela region, another 37 people have been wounded, while an Iranian strike along the central coast in Tel Aviv district killed several people and wounded dozens more. Israeli rescue teams continue their search and rescue mission in the coastal city of Bat Yam, where at least 6 people have died so far. Rescue personnel say they are expecting dozens of casualties. At least 35 people remained trapped under debris of a building damaged by an Iranian missile.
As you can see, a missile hit an 8-story building. The damage is widespread. Fire and rescue services arrived here with large forces, as our main efforts here are being spent locating people who are trapped and putting out fires. We rescued dozens from inside the building. We are continuing together with the Home Front Command and the Israel Police to carry out searches in circles beyond the building you see behind me. The damage is peripheral, and that is why we are clearing the site in much larger circles.
And for more on this, we're being joined live by Mr. Ben Aris. He is the founder and editor-in-chief of BNE IntelliNews and also former Moscow bureau chief for the Daily Telegraph. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast on WION World is One.
Good morning.
So, for now, even as tensions are escalating in West Asia, the fighting seems largely restricted to Israel and Iran. But what happens if they climb the next rung of the ladder and get the United States involved, and this time overtly? According to you, just how drastic could it be, and how could it change the shape and form of the conflict in the region?
Well, we wrote a speculative piece yesterday asking if this was a Sarajevo moment, you know, the murder of Arch Ferdinand that triggered the First World War, and it's the complex network of alliances between the various powers, great powers involved, that what starts as a small regional conflict can then spill over and bring great powers with each other. The Israeli government has now formally asked the Americans to come into the war on their side and help them perpetrate this. And the Americans have said no, because if they do that, then countries like Pakistan have said that they would come in on the side of the Iranians. Moreover, Pakistan has said, Islamabad has said that if the Israelis use a nuclear weapon against Iran, then Pakistan will respond with a nuclear weapon against Iran. So clearly this is very, very tense situation. And given the experience of the First World War, how that began, I think all the great powers are going to be extremely cautious. In particular, I think the Americans are going to try very hard not to get involved. But there's the danger, there's speculation that the Israelis will do a false flag operation. The Americans, Rubio, the secretary of the foreign secretary, has made it clear that if any American assets are attacked anywhere in the Middle East, we will retaliate against Tehran, against Iran, with all that they've got. So it's actually very close. And that's an obvious strategy. I mean, Tehran has got to decide whether they want to bring America into the war. But then it could be some other actor takes the initiative and attacks an American base or an airfield or assassinates a US diplomat living in the Middle East in order specifically to provoke exactly that response. Because Israel is very powerful. It's supplied by the states, but the problem is that I don't think Israel on its own can achieve everything that it wants to, which is specifically at this point, I think, destroying all of Iran's nuclear potential, all its nuclear weapon potential. I think that's the short-term goal at the moment.
Right, and you're absolutely right to point out that US's involvement at this point could prove to be catastrophic. But at the same time, we're hearing from Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu, who we know has long been accused of wanting to drag the United States into helping him defeat Iran. But now, as per reports, the top Pentagon officials are divided over the extent of US military support for Israel. And now it's a split, which is and whose resolution will shape President Trump's second-term foreign policy. So now the question that I want to ask you is dual-pronged here. The first, if Trump does get involved, what does this mean for the United States? And second, what would be the circumstance under which US could get drawn in?
Look, this is a difficult question. I'm sort of split. The trouble with the States is that it's shown itself time and time again to overestimate exactly how powerful it is militarily. It does have the most powerful military in the world. It does have an enormous range of very sophisticated, very powerful weapons. But then starting a region-wide war in the Middle East, the longer wars go on, the more unpredictable they become. And I think with this one, if the Americans did go in and attack Iran, it would become very unpredictable very quickly. Because then you have a proliferation, you have like the possibility of not just arms on the ground in an open conflict, but then terrorist attacks. You have the whole oil production comes in danger, because another thing you could do is take out the refineries. So far, the Israelis have been hitting domestic refineries and gas plants to affect the Iranian economy. But if they started targeting the international stuff, if they closed the Straits of Hormuz, for example, then that would cause an international energy crisis. And then where do we go from there? I'm not sure at all. Then all sorts of players in the region would be dragged in. Like I've already mentioned Pakistan. I don't think Saudi Arabia wants to see that. If they got cut off, the Chinese are very dependent on the chemicals, LPG, that comes through the Straits of Hormuz. They would get involved because they don't want to see that. And it spins out of control. I mean, the possibilities multiply rapidly. And for the Trump administration, again, it's the last thing he wants to do is actually go into yet another forever war. And this would really be a forever war, because he's promised to bring these all to an end. And actually exactly the opposite is happening. He's just been escalating and destabilizing the international situation, both in Iran and Ukraine is also against the back wall and has been cut off from US aid and might be defeated by the Russians. And so this is all looking possible that it's all going to go completely wrong. And rather than be the deal maker that he loves to see, he's actually going to have destabilized the entire system. And we're going to go into sort of multifaceted crises.
Right, Ben, and you've interestingly mentioned that Pakistan is on Iranian side, and we know that Pakistan's General Asim Munir is in the United States right now and is on the Iranian side. How should we look at this?
Well, as I say, it's like Sarajevo again. It's this network of alliances and allegiances. There's actually very little in the way of formal, security guarantees, military guarantees, agreements between the various players. But a lot of people have got a lot of stakes in this. And as you know, that in India, the tensions are already very high with Pakistan. Also, they're high with China. They have vested interests in what's going on in Iran, what's going on in the Middle East, their own relationships. And so if one of those players like Pakistan gets involved militarily, then that, again, adds a new factor, a new layer of uncertainty as the other countries, India, China, would respond, and you end up with maybe not a flat-out head-to-head clash like we saw in the First World War, but more like the scenario that's playing out in Ukraine, where effectively you've got a de facto proxy war between NATO and Russia being played out in Ukraine. And I can easily Iran would play the same role that people like China or Pakistan would start supplying it with military kit, with supplies, with money, without actually putting overtly their own forces into the field. But then that just perpetuates the war. And the war in Ukraine was supposed to be over in 3 days, and here we are going into the 4th year with no end in sight. And you'd end up with a similar situation that Iran, I think, in the first round is inferior to Israel militarily, but if you start fighting this proxy war by supplying it and not having overt targets that you can hit, like in Ukraine, then you get to a situation very quickly where it just spins out for the long term, and you end up with fighting, with mass destruction of the Iranian economy. But it doesn't collapse, it doesn't fall. I mean, one of the goals we think here is that Israelis trying to bring about regime change, but all you've done is you've already inflamed the people in Iran who are going to fight back in the same way Ukrainians are persevering and determined to fight to the end. You could see the same thing happening in Iran.
Right, Ben, very valid points there. But now it's pertinent to ask, especially at this point, whether Iran would return to the negotiating table for the sixth round of nuclear talks. And while the opinion remains largely divided, there's little hope that diplomacy might prevail after all. What's your assessment? Do you think there's any circumstance under which Iran might reconsider its current stance?
I think we have a bureau in Tehran, and our base assumption is that Tehran doesn't want to have a full-scale war with Israel. They've tried very hard to avoid it. I mean, we had those rounds of missile exchanges last year, and then the responses were always extremely measured, calculated, enough so that they could keep face after an Israeli attack. They responded with missiles, but not enough in order to trigger a war. So I think that the possibility settlement is there. I think Trump himself says that he's still willing to do a nuclear deal, that Tehran has indicated is willing to do some sort of deal. The Americans have been fairly heavy-handed in the terms of the extremity of their demands, but I think there is negotiation. Because as I just said, I mean, if this war doesn't come to a quick negotiated end, it'll drag on for years, and the Iranian economy will be destroyed in the same way as the Ukrainian economy has been destroyed. And nobody wants that. The cost of reconstruction, the misery that it will cause to the regular people. And that's also fundamentally destabilizing for the regime in Tehran. If the people are suffering too much, they face the problem, the potential of an uprising, because the people weren't that happy with the state before this war started. But it's going to be very difficult to do. And I think, particularly on the American side, they're going to argue or believe like we should perpetrate this for a while. We should let the Israelis do as much damage as possible to improve our negotiating position. And they could end. I mean, that's what happened in Ukraine, is the West overplayed its hand, and there's now in a position where ceasefire has failed because Putin thinks he's winning. And if the Israelis think they're winning, or the Americans think they're winning, they might pursue this to the point where Iran is no longer willing. You know, it's lost too much. I mean, we're in the very, very first days. And again, if you remember in the Ukrainian situation, there was a negotiated deal in Istanbul after the first few weeks. So one assumes that we're in that position now where there is diplomacy going on behind the scenes, trying to find some sort of formula that could bring this to an end. But it's a very delicate discussion. And in Ukraine, it failed. It remains to be seen what happens with Iran.
Right, Ben, and building on what you've briefly mentioned now, that the Israeli strikes seem to have inflicted an unprecedented degree of damage on Iran's nuclear and military capabilities. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has suggested that this might go on for days. Now, there's also this view that these attacks are a ploy to undermine Iran's internal stability and possibly force a change in leadership, which we mentioned. Now, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, those are the two goals, aren't they? I mean, the primary goal is to destroy Iran's ability to build a bomb. I mean, the attacks targeted on Friday night, and they targeted specifically nuclear uranium enrichment plants. And at the same time, they tried to take out the top tier of scientists with some success in order to stymie the ability of Iran to finish that bomb. And I should mention here, I mean, one of the upshots of this attack is that Iran has been very hesitant about completing its bomb. It's been a threat. And in that sense, it's been a card for negotiations. But now the incentive for Iran is to build a bomb as fast as it can. And the longer this goes on, the more that incentive will be to build the bomb and then actually use it. Because it's been shown, and again, the Ukrainian conflict NATO is terrified of attacking Russia directly because it's a nuclear-armed weapon country. And in this case, I think Iran would not have been attacked if it had a nuclear weapon. And that's clear to them now. We've been following this story. People and lawmakers in Tehran have been talking about the need to make a bomb. So I think that could come fairly quickly now. But to give them a card, because it buys you a guarantee, it stops any attacks if you can respond in kind. So we have to wait and see how that one particularly plays out.
Right, thank you so much, Ben, for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your perspective with us.
My pleasure.